Hello everyone. In this video, I'll be talking about COVID-19 from ENT point of view. That is, what are the symptomatology pertaining to ENT and what are the safe practice guidelines with respect to ENT. So I'll be covering this topic under these headings: introduction, pathophysiology, symptomatology, diagnosis, then safe practice guidelines. Then some points I'll be talking in detail about the tracheostomy, and finally the treatment part. So we start with the introduction. Severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, that is SARS-CoV, is the name given to this disease. And initially it was called 2019 novel coronavirus. Novel because this was the first time that this virus had infected the humans. And lately this disease is known as coronavirus disease 2019, that is COVID-19. Now, viruses from this family have previously known to cause epidemics in humans. For example, SARS-CoV in 2002 and 2003 causes an epidemic in China. Then another virus, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, coronavirus. It caused the epidemic in Saudi Arabia in 2012 and 13. But this particular virus, that is SARS-CoV-2, it is for the first time that it has infected humans. And on 30th January 2020, the World Health Organization said that this disease, it is public health emergency of international concern. And finally, on March 11, 2020, the World Health Organization confirmed it as a pandemic disease. Now we all know that the first reported case was in Wuhan in China, which was in December 2019. And from that day or from that time, this disease has rapidly progressed globally. And if we see the latest figures as of 22nd September, the total people affected in India is around 56 lakhs, and similarly in the world the numbers are very worrying. Around 31 million people have already been affected, and there are the number of deaths in the world are approaching 1 million. Now, what is the pathophysiology of this virus? How does it gain entry into the human body? Then how does it cause the symptoms and affects the different organs of our body? That we'll see in the pathophysiology. So the incubation period of this virus, it ranges from 2 to 14 days. But the average most common incubation period is 5 to 6 days. So incubation period is the period between a person getting infected and showing symptoms. So sometimes it is also called pre-symptomatic period, and it is a very crucial period because this is the pre-symptomatic transmission occurs in this period, and most of the times the virus cannot be detected in the human body during this period because it is less in number or the viral load is less. So it is difficult to detect the virus into the body with different tests, and these people, they are infective, so they can infect the others. So that is called pre-symptomatic transmission. Now here in this figure we can see the different routes of transmission. So here we can see that the most common route, it is through droplets. Now droplets are generally more than 5 micrometer in diameter, and they travel a distance of less than 1 meter. So when a infected individual, he coughs or sneezes, then he releases a lot of droplets which fall generally in the area of not more than 1 meter. And if the susceptible individual is within this range, then he can get infected. Then secondly, smaller droplet nuclei, or what we call the aerosols, they are less than 5 micrometer in diameter, but they generally travel more than 1 meter. So they get remain suspended in the air for a long time. So nowadays airborne transmission has also been known with this virus. And infected individual, when he speaks, then also he can release a lot of droplet nuclei which can travel a long distance to infect the susceptible individual. Now another mode of transmission is the through contact. So in contact also, one is direct contact, other one is indirect. So direct contact means when a susceptible individual comes in contact with a infected individual, through shake hands or any touching, then this virus can get transmitted. Indirect transmission, indirect contact transmission means when an infected individual touches some surface, for example beds or door handles, and the virus is known to remain alive on those surfaces for 24 to 72 hours. So within this time, if an susceptible individual touches the same surface, then he can get infected. So that is called indirect contact. So these are the different transmission routes from an infected individual to susceptible individual. Now, when the virus gains entry into the human body, it mainly affects the upper and the lower respiratory tract infection of the upper and the lower respiratory tract of the person. So that is respiratory system. So how does it affect is that this virus, it causes these cells like macrophages, T lymphocytes, dendritic cells, endothelial cells, which are present in the respiratory system. These get activated and then they release the chemical inflammatory mediators like cytokines and chemokines. So they are released in large amount and they produce the inflammatory response of the body. Chemokines, for example, interferons, different types of interferons like alpha, gamma, then interleukins, all these and chemokines, they are released and they produce the inflammatory response. So this sudden inflammatory response, it is known as cytokine storm. So we see here that this coronavirus, it activates these different cells in the respiratory system to release different types of chemical inflammatory mediators, and it is the interplay of these mediators which is responsible for the many symptoms of this disease and also the affection of different organs. For example, fever, then impaired hematopoietic function, then there are some coagulopathies seen with this virus, for example DIC, then it can affect the liver causing hyperlipidemia, and it can affect the kidney also, and ultimately with the involvement of all these organs it can lead to the multiple organ damage. So what are the symptoms of this virus? What is the symptomatology? Now ICMR has given this guidelines that the most common symptoms of COVID-19, they are the fever, cough, dry cough, and tiredness or fatigue or weakness. The less common symptoms are aches and pains, that is body ache, malaise, and sore throat, diarrhea, conjunctivitis, headache, anosmia, that is loss of sense of smell, ageusia, that is loss of sense of taste, and skin rash. And then there are some serious symptoms like dyspnea, chest pain, loss of speech, and sudden loss of movement. So we can see here that the three most common symptoms are fever, dry cough, and tiredness. And we can also see that these are not very specific symptoms because they can be a manifestation of any viral infection, not only coronavirus. So regarding the symptomatology, L. Enver et al. They did a systematic review of the different published literature to know what is the incidence of different symptoms of this virus. And they also came up with the same finding as ICMR, that the most common symptoms, they are the fever, cough, and fatigue. Other common symptoms can be expectoration, dyspnea, then myalgia and diarrhea. They also studied the ENT symptoms and they found that though less than the non-ENT symptoms, but if you see overall, the sore throat was common, followed by headache, then smell affection, that is anosmia, then pharyngeal erythema, that is congestion in the throat, nasal congestion, nasal obstruction, runny nose or watery nose or rhinorrhea, upper respiratory tract infection, and tonsillar enlargement. So this was the incidence of different ENT symptoms in their study. So this graph compares the non-ENT symptoms with the ENT symptoms. So we can see here that if we see overall, the most common symptoms are non-ENT symptoms, and ENT symptoms constitute very less number of patients. But one important point to note here is that though present in less numbers, anosmia and ageusia, they when present, they are highly specific of this disease. So one systematic review done by Ageman et al. They studied 8,438 patients from 13 different countries, and they found that there is high prevalence of olfactory and gustatory dysfunction. So these two symptoms they can combine and they are then called olfactory and gustatory dysfunction. They found that there was high prevalence among the patients who are infected with COVID-19, and then they suggested that there should be routine screening for these two conditions, and it can improve the case detection for COVID-19. So we can say that anosmia and aguizia can be very specific for COVID-19, especially if they are of sudden onset and the origin cannot be attributed to any other cause. Then they should raise a suspicion that they may be because of COVID-19. Now, regarding the illness severity, in another study from China, in which the authors KK To et al. They studied more than 44,000 persons, and then they classified this disease according to the severity into mild to moderate, severe, and critical. Now, mild to moderate means there were mild symptoms up to mild pneumonia. Severe means there was dyspnea, hypoxia, and more than 50% of the lung involvement on imaging. Then critical patients included patients with respiratory failure, shock, or multi-organ system dysfunction. Now here we can see that maximum patients belong to mild to moderate degree. So we should focus our resources on this category so that these patients they do not deteriorate into severe and critical categories. And severe ones constituted 14% and critical were around 5% in that study. So what is the diagnosis of COVID-19? How can we diagnose COVID-19? Now it can be done by two methods. One is the molecular method, that is viral testing. Another one, which we'll see later, it is the radiological diagnosis. Now in viral testing also there are three different types of tests. So first is the polymerase chain reaction. Now it is a gold standard, we can say, to diagnose the acute infection by SARS-CoV-2. It is a very sensitive and a very specific test which can diagnose COVID-19. Then another test is, now this PCR test, it detects the viral RNA. Okay, so and the next test is the rapid antigen test. It does not detect the RNA, but it detects specific proteins which are known as antigens on the surface of the virus and can identify people who are at the peak of infection when virus levels in the body are likely to be high. Now this rapid antigen test, it has advantage that it gives results within 15 to 30 minutes. So it can be used as a very good test for screening of the patients. However, the disadvantage is that this is not very specific. It means that if the symptoms are present, the symptoms of the COVID-19 are present, but this test comes negative, then we should always confirm with a PCR test, polymerase chain reaction test. So the chances of false negative with this test are more. Secondly, when the disease has just begun, that is when the initial part of patient is during the initial part of the infection, or if the patient is convalescent, that is he is recovering from the infection, then in these two conditions the virus load in the body is less, so rapid antigen test may not detect that virus in our body, so a false negative report may come. And this is the limitation, but otherwise it can be used as a screening test because it gives rapid results in 15 to 20 minutes. Third test is the detection of serum antibodies, and this also test can detect both acute and remote infection, but again it has two disadvantages. First is that the person requires time to develop the immunity or the antibodies, so this test may come negative even though the person is infected. Secondly, sometimes it may detect the non-specific antibodies which may not be specific for this coronavirus but maybe because of some another infection. So these are the two disadvantages of serum antibody testing. However, if we see that out of all these three tests, the most important and most sensitive and specific test is the RT-PCR or the PCR, polymerase chain reaction testing. Now in radiological diagnosis, we go for high resolution CT scan of the thorax. Now in the CT scan, we see that the left lung has 2 lobes, right lung has 3 lobes. So we have total 5 lobes. Now each lobe is given a score of 5. So 5 lobes, total score will be 25. and based on the percentage of the lung involvement, that if the less than 5% of the lung is involved, lung involvement means it can be consolidation, it can be crazy paving pattern. So there are different uh, pathologies in the lung, and based on the amount of the lung involved, scoring is done. So if it is 5 to 25, the score will be 2. 26% to 49% lung involvement, score will be 3. Then 50 to 75, it will be 4. And finally, if the lung involvement is more than 75, the score will be 5. So each lobe is given a score from 1 to 5, and then total score is calculated. Maximum score will be 25, and then it gives an idea about the involvement of the lung and the severity of the disease. Now there are recent studies have shown that sometimes even RT-PCR can be negative, but if there are findings on HRCT thorax and the score is high, then that person should be treated as COVID-19, though RT-PCR is negative. So we can say that HRCT thorax is more sensitive than RT-PCR in diagnosing COVID-19. Now, safe practice guidelines from ENT point of view. So before seeing the safe practice guidelines, there are some terms which are commonly being used nowadays. First is quarantine. Quarantine means restricting the activities or separating people who are not ill themselves but may have been exposed to COVID-19. It means that if a person has a history of being in contact with a person infected with COVID-19, then that person who he is, though he is not ill, but he is quarantined or kept separately. Second is isolation. Isolation means separating people who are ill with symptoms of COVID-19 and may be infectious. So if we see broad thing, then quarantine is for self-protection, while isolation is protection of the society at large. Because people who are ill, when they are isolated, they will prevent the infection from being transmitted. And quarantine means if you restrict your activities, then you will not get infected. So quarantine is for self protection, and isolation it is for protection of society at a large. Then another term which is used nowadays is physical distancing, or more commonly we call it social distancing. It means being physically apart. So WHO recommends that there should be at least a distance of 1 meter between individuals. Now that is the 1 meter idea came from the fact that the virus spreads through droplets, and the droplets they generally they cannot travel more than 1 minute, more than 1 meter, because they are of more size, more than 5 micrometer in diameter, and that is why we should always keep physical distance between individuals to prevent the transmission of this virus. Now ENT persons, they are more prone to getting this infection because many of the ENT procedures, they are aerosol generating procedures. For example, direct laryngoscopy, bronchoscopy, then esophagoscopy, then oral cavity procedures like peritonsillar abscess drainage, then nasal procedures or PNS surgeries, for example, FES, nasal packing, then foreign body removal from nose, pharynx, and airway, then tracheostomy. Tracheostomy is a highly aerosol generating procedure. So that I'll talk something in detail later on. Then powered instrumentation is used in ENT, for example, drilling during mastoid surgery. It produces aerosols. Then use of lasers in laryngeal surgery. Then laser produces fumes. So that is also aerosol generating procedure. So that is why ENT doctors or ENT surgeons, um, they have more chances of getting this infection because of these procedures. Now, safe ENT practice guidelines which are given by ICMR. So in OPD, if possible, teleconsultation should be preferred. Teleconsultation can be in the form of audio consultation, video consultation, or even text message consultation. However, if teleconsultation is not feasible, then one patient at a time should be allowed in the examination room, and that should be without attendant. Then, as we know that the most common symptom of this coronavirus disease, it is a fever. So there should be thermal screening at the entry, at the OPD entry of every patient, and everyone should be encouraged to use the mask, hand hygiene, and social distancing. Now, in OPD, the ENT doctors, they should be wearing level 1 PPT, level 1 PPE kit. So level 1 means they should wear a cap, a mask, or a face shield and gloves. And As far as possible, any procedure in the OPD should be avoided. For example, endoscopy, 0 degree or 70 degree, that is laryngeal examination. All these things, they should be avoided. If at all they are to be done, then there should be a separate room for endoscopy and biopsy procedures. And in those rooms, the ENT surgeon should be wearing level 2 PPE kit, that is full PPE kit, including the aprons and the gowns. Then regarding the wards, only one patient's caretaker should be allowed in the time at the time, and he should also be screened. Then there should be hand washing facilities in the ward. Then sanitization and social distancing posters should be displayed in the ward, so that the patient's relatives can also read and get educated. Then there should be distancing of at least 2 meters between two patients' beds, and there should be separate area for patients with high aerosol generating procedure, for example, tracheostomized patients. So if a patient is tracheostomized, then he should be kept separately from other patients, because when he coughs, he will produce a lot of aerosols. Then in OT, so as far as possible, elective operation should be postponed for some time for COVID as well as non-COVID patients. And COVID-19 positive patients, they should be operated only for emergency indications, and that too in designated OT for COVID patients. And that OT, it has the negative pressures. Now this negative pressure will prevent the aerosol or droplets from spreading. There should be screening for symptoms, contact. Symptoms means the common symptoms like fever, tiredness, cough, or other symptoms, anosmia, agusia. So they should be screening. Then if a patient has a history of contact with an infected individual within 14 days, so that should be kept in mind. And we should also ask the patient the residential area from which he is coming, whether it is a containment area or it is a area where more number of cases have been isolated. So that screening should be done. Then pre-operative, a chest X-ray or more commonly CT scan thorax should be done. SpO2 should be monitored. Respiratory rate should be known. And any aerosol generating procedure, for example tracheostomy, they should be avoided under local anesthesia. They should be done under general anesthesia with complete paralysis, so that the patient does not cough and the aerosols or droplets, they do not spread. So this is a flowchart for the non-emergency surgery. So if a surgery is planned, then COVID-19 RT-PCR test should be done. For that, the patient should be admitted 1 or 2 days prior to the planned surgery, and patient should be isolated. If that test becomes negative, then straight away surgery can be done. Or if the test is positive or patient is COVID suspect, then elective surgery should be postponed for 7 to 14 days, and patient should be reassessed after that. Now, if for any reason we are not able to perform this COVID-19 test, it cannot be performed, then the patient should be admitted and should be in strict quarantine for 7 to 14 days. And after 14 days, if there are no symptoms, then patient can be operated. Similarly, for post-operative period also, he should be discharged when he is physically and physiologically stable, and he should be advised to self-isolate himself for 5 or 7 days. So these are some of the guidelines for non-emergency ENT surgery during COVID pandemic. Now, ICMR has also given some procedure-specific guidelines. For example, head and neck malignancy. Now we know that if a patient is having carcinoma, so it is not an elective surgery, but sometimes it is not an emergency also. So they have classified as semi-emergent procedures. Now, surgeon should weigh the risk benefit of postponing the surgery for 14 days or scheduling the procedure in COVID designated OT. So if there is no emergency, and if the surgeon feels that uh, the surgery can be postponed, so for 14 days we should postpone this surgery to know if the patient is developing any symptoms or not. Or if it is emergency, then the procedure can be done, but in COVID designated OT. Now, direct laryngoscopy is to be avoided just for the sake of obtaining biopsy when FNAC from the neck node can be considered. So if the patient is having neck swelling and FNAC is suggestive of any metastatic lesion, then unnecessarily direct laryngoscopy should not be done just for the sake of obtaining biopsy from larynx. Then as far as possible, daycare surgery should be done. The use of powered instruments like drills and lasers, they should be avoided, and complex reconstructive procedures should be avoided. And if for any reason the surgical procedure is prolonged, then powered air purifying respirator or PARP may be used, which will actively purify the inspired air. Now, similarly for otologic, that is ear surgeries and nasal surgeries and skull-based surgeries, they should be avoided elective surgeries as far as possible. But if the patient is high risk category, that is a complicated patient or emergency is, if there is an emergency, then this surgeries can be performed. But again, the surgeon should wear the level 2 PPE and it should be conducted in a COVID designated OT. Now, for disinfection of the surfaces of OT or OPD or our instruments, there are different chemicals available. So freshly prepared 1% sodium hypochlorite, it can be used as a disinfectant for cleaning and disinfection. So leave the solution for a contact period of at least 10 minutes is recommended. Then sensitive instruments like BP instruments, thermometer, our endoscopes, they can be wiped with 70% alcohol based rub or spirit. It can be 70% propyl alcohol or ethyl alcohol. And endoscopes can also be sterilized by immersing in 2% glutaraldehyde solution for 20 minutes before they are used in other patient. So 1% sodium hypochlorite, 70% alcohol based rub or 2% glutaraldehyde. These are some of the chemicals which are recommended for disinfection of the surfaces and instruments. Now, what is the role of tracheostomy? Now we know that a general dictum says that when we are anticipating long intubation in a patient, then we should do early tracheostomy and it will benefit the patient, because there are complications of long intubation like laryngeal and tracheal stenosis, granulation formation, and cleaning or suctioning of the long intubation endotracheal tube is difficult. So for that, tracheostomy is very beneficial. However, the benefits of performing an early tracheostomy in critically ill COVID patients are unclear. So whatever evidence is present whatever evidence is present, there are no clear-cut benefits of performing early tracheostomy in critically ill patients. And studies also say to avoid tracheostomy in COVID positive or suspected patients during the periods of respiratory instability or heightened ventilator dependence. So the patients, there are certain parameters to know the dependency on ventilator. For example, P, positive end expressive pressure. So if that is high, or if the patient is otherwise respiratory and hemodynamically unstable, then we should avoid tracheostomy. Then all cases should ideally be discussed in a multidisciplinary team which consists of intensivists, anesthesiologists, and ENT surgeons. So discussion should be on a case-to-case basis regarding the timing and the benefits of tracheostomy in a particular patients. And it is known that after 14 days, the rate of recovery is high, with subsequent ventilator weaning as the primary goal of care. So after 14 days, if the patient survives the first 14 days, then there are more chances that this patient will improve. So the primary goal of care then should be ventilator weaning, and then the tracheostomy should be considered, that is after 14 days. Another benefit of doing tracheostomy after 14 days is that by that time the virus load in the patient has decreased significantly. So the chances of the infection of the healthcare professionals who perform the tracheostomy, they are very less after 14 days. Now, whenever a tracheostomy is to be performed in COVID patients, then general anesthesia should be given when feasible rather than local anesthesia. That is total paralysis, so that the patient does not cough and generate the aerosols. If intubation is not possible because of any reason, then superior laryngeal nerve block can be given, in which injection lignocaine is injected into the trachea prior to incising the trachea. It also reduces the cough. And transient apnea is to be maintained during the insertion of the tracheostomy tube. This will also prevent droplets and aerosols from spreading. So these are the important points which should be kept in mind if at all tracheostomy is to be done in COVID-19 patient. Then closed suction system should be used during tracheostomy, and double lumen cuff tube should be used, and it prevents the frequent change of the tube, so less exposure to the healthcare professionals. Then heat moisture exchanger, it is to be attached to the tracheostomy tube when the patient is shifted from one place to other. It will also prevent aerosol generation. And for high risk cases, a triple layer or N95 mask may also be worn over the tracheostomy tube. So if the person is having excessive cough, then additional protection can be given by putting a triple layer or N95 mask over the tracheostomy tube. So what is the treatment of COVID-19? Now, as such, there is no specific drug which has been approved for use of COVID-19 or which has been found effective against this virus. But symptomatic and supportive treatment is the mainstay of the treatment at present. So if the disease is of mild category, then if there is fever, then paracetamol can be given, and hydroxychloroquine can also be given in mild cases. In moderate cases, the main important thing is oxygen support. Then tablet hydroxychloroquine 400 milligram 2 times a day on the first day, followed by 200 milligram 2 times a day for 4 days. And this hydroxychloroquine should be given after ECG assessment, because we know that this drug is known to prolong the QT interval. So a baseline ECG should also be done, always be done before starting tablet hydroxychloroquine. Then intravenous methylprednisolone or dexamethasone should also be considered, because these are steroids, they are anti-inflammatory, they are known to improve the respiratory function of the body. And prophylactic dose of unfractionated heparin or low molecular weight heparin should also be given, because such patients are more prone to develop coagulopathies, for example DIC. So to prevent that, prophylactic use of heparin is also recommended. So for severe cases, early oxygen therapy should be initiated. Then fluid management should be done to prevent the person from going into shock. Then high flow nasal cannula oxygenation should be done. If the oxygen requirement of person is more, then high flow nasal cannula oxygenation or non-invasive mechanical ventilation is useful. If the person does not respond to this also, then mechanical ventilation should be done, and position ventilation or prone ventilation is also recommended. Then management of the other conditions also, for example septic shock and low molecular weight heparin for anticoagulation. So if we see that there is no specific drug which is actually anti COVID or anti-coronavirus, but all these are supportive and symptomatic treatments which should be initiated as early as possible for maximum benefit. Now there are certain therapies which are under at present in investigational stages. For example, Remdesivir, it is a broad spectrum antiviral drug. It may be considered in patients with moderate disease. Then convalescent plasma, it can also be considered in patients with moderate disease who are not improving despite the steroids. Not improving means their oxygen requirement is progressively increasing. Similarly, for same group of patients, tocilizumab can also be considered. It is an interleukin 6 inhibitor, and it can be used in persons with moderate disease who have increasing oxygen requirements. But again, these all drugs, they are still in the investigational phase, and as such they are not definitely approved for COVID-19, but they have, in the initial studies, they have shown good results. So we know that as such there is no cure or vaccine for this disease. So the only thing we can do is protect ourselves. So by the time the vaccine comes, mask is our vaccine, distancing is our immunity, and hand washing is medicine. So we should religiously follow these 3 points to prevent ourselves and our society from getting infected. Thank you.